How's everybody? Good. I'm delighted to be here today. Thanks to AISTI for inviting me along and gave me a difficult brief, and hopefully I'll stick to it. It's a broad one, which is always dangerous to give a broad brief to someone like me because I can wander a little bit. But I think the idea was that, the topic was nutrition and nutrients, and I suppose it made me think sort of when I was given this task of maybe, coming up with some ideas for the students in their projects. So hopefully I'll come up with some ideas for you. My name is Tommy Heffernan. I'm a vet, and I've been 20 years now since I've qualified, and done lots of different things, but one of the big times for me was 2008, and maybe you'll see throughout this why it was a pivotal moment for me, because I sort of had hit a plateau in my career. I was quite disinterested in what I was doing, and it's when I started re-engaging with my job as a vet, and I really haven't looked back since then. And I suppose for me, I started learning, and it's interesting talking to you as educators how powerful learning actually is. I haven't stayed in my lane, I suppose, much. My traditional veterinary role, I've changed a lot. And I've looked at critical thinking and systems and biology, and I keep asking the questions, why? And I think food systems are fascinating. And at the moment, we're looking at a time of huge change in agriculture. I'm interested in psychology because of the impact I've had looking at my own development. And I'm interested in communication. So hopefully some of those messages will come true. But I'm certainly straying away from the knitting today as it's described. Now this is a very busy slide, but it does sort of show my evolution through my career. I started as a young vet, very much working with sick animals. Then I realized that it was more important maybe to look at herd-based medicine. I got really interested in nutrition. We're going to talk about nutrition today. And it brought me all the way back to soil, which is really, really interesting. Again, what are we raising animals for? It was making that link into human health and gut and metabolic health. The environment, that story that we're hearing so much about today, and I'll touch on. How did all these pieces of the jigsaw fit together? And then we've had COVID-19, which is going to accelerate a lot of our trends, particularly the reduction of antibiotics. I suppose I've been lucky to do lots of courses and training since 2008. One of the most significant ones was cow signals. A really simple concept about looking at animals and understanding their behaviors and biology. I've been involved in farms, which has been really good as well for me to get the reality of farming and how difficult it is. I was lucky in 2018 to get a no-field farming scholarship. And I think for me this year, a real sort of eureka moment that I'll talk about during my presentation was to get to work with an Irish company called Precision Microbes, which was to kind of a piece for me that was missing, looking at nature and how we can harness the power of it. On our farms that I work with, Vision Farming, we set up 5 pillars, and I'll kind of discuss their evolution throughout my presentation today. I think with a lot of these conversations, a lot of these presentations, it can be very easy to forget about some of the most important things of all, which is farmer sustainability. Actually having people on farms to produce our food. And, we have COP26 next week, and there's a real push away from animal agriculture in particular, but I think it's a very, very important central part of our whole story, and I'll try and make a case for that today, and maybe some ideas for you guys will come out of that. This is a very interesting guy. I got to interview him last year. He's Jack Bobo, who's a food futurist, and I think Jack's a really interesting guy to look up, because he's some really interesting concepts. And one of the things that caught me was this idea, are our food systems bad and getting worse? Are they good and getting better? And you could frame that narrative around all our challenges. We've seen so many things improve. Sometimes everything is catastrophized, that we actually, we forget what we've achieved. This is a massive resource, I think, for teachers, is gapminder.org. Brings these wonderful animations around sort of what we've achieved over the last 200 years. Infant mortality, poverty, GDP. And I think it's a great book. It's backed by a great book called Factfulness. Sometimes we always rush to the negative, and I think some of that's happening in agriculture at the moment. Now, some of you were in Moore Park probably last week, and you would have seen, or 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you would have seen all the stuff and the work that's been done by Teagasc around how much we've improved and how much Irish dairy farming in particular has improved. And looking at Irish milk is one of the lowest carbon footprints globally, particularly when you include carbon sequestration. So sometimes I think in these arguments we forget what we've achieved, and I think it's a wonderful resource that absolutely we need to improve, but we've achieved a lot. And back in 2008, someone who I didn't particularly like at the time, through no fault of that person, said to me, "Be better, not bitter." And I think today's talk is about how can we get better, recognizing what we've achieved, but how can we get better? And for me, this year was really about, I suppose, thinking about what I'd achieved, what I had done and what I'd seen. And I really have coming to this idea about respecting biology and working with it, not breaking it. And that comes to soil, plants, and animals, and ourselves. We can't talk about agriculture without looking at the big challenges. I mean, everywhere we look, there's conversations about the environment. But it's a very complex subject. And everything I'm talking about today, these are just ideas. These are incredibly complex. We look at global population increasing to 9.5 billion by 2050. We've got antibiotic reduction, animal welfare, a very polarizing topic. If you talk to farmers, what's their biggest challenge on farm? It's farm labor, actually having people to do the work to produce the food. And what does the future of food look like? And I'm going to try and make an argument for linking the future of food to our metabolic and human health. There's one problem that dwarfs all other problems, and that's the environment. I mean, if you read the IPCC report, your science teachers, we're scientists, we know science has achieved a lot for us. The science is pretty clear, and we're in trouble. And it's not just agriculture, but it's all our systems that are in trouble. And I think a lot of the focus is in agriculture, but this is going to be the topic that is really going to drive everything we do. While it might be on agriculture at the moment, it's going to be affecting every one of our lives. It does feel like, the elephant in the room is still fossil fuels. And if you want to read a great book by, I think, a very balanced environmental scientist, it's Michael E. Mann's book on the new climate war. And, he says agriculture, of course, has a role to play, but the real big one is still fossil fuels. We've many challenges. We're talking about our national herd decreasing, we've methane, how we measure it, we've ammonia, we've nitrates. There's a gap. In all these stories, there's a gap between the realities and public perception. But it's going to drive the biggest change. And I suppose any of us, what can we do? We can just ask, as individuals, and I can't say I'm doing anything great, but we have to ask, what can I do better? I certainly, through my role as a vet and a consultant, work on better animal health and that role. I'm very cautious about simplistic solutions to our challenges like synthetic biology. Lab-grown meat being the answer to all our challenges, and a massive reduction in animal protein. And as I said, this year sort of was a missing piece in the jigsaw. It was the last piece of the biology piece for me. I suppose the queue of people talking about challenges is long. The people standing in the solutions queue is a bit smaller. And I think, in fairness to you, and my message to you today is maybe what you look at the new curriculum as a task, coming up with ideas for your students, but maybe it's an opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity for students to look ahead and see all these challenges, and as small as the projects might be, maybe they'll all together, if you accumulate them, they'll have an impact. But challenges are interesting because farming and agroforestry are the only industries that are able to sequester carbon. They're the only industries that are part of the solution. I'm not saying we don't have to change. The only constant in life is change. But change is incredibly difficult. And that means we need education and research. That's why I'll throw it back to you at the very end. But I actually think it's a fantastic time to be in agriculture. It's probably the most important industry. It sort of links everything together. So what will farms of the future look like? This may seem idealistic, but I think it's the idea of respecting food, understanding the nutrition of particularly livestock, and linking it to the health of humans, and doing this in a way that's healthy to our biome, our planet. We can't look forward without looking backwards. And many people will look at the Green Revolution, the godfather of it being Norman Borlaug, and look at what we've achieved in agriculture. Some will say it's a negative, some will say it is a positive. But it is quite remarkable when global agriculture was faced post-World War II with a rise in global population and the potential for mass starvation, agriculture stepped up to the mark by the increased production of food. And it has been quite remarkable. Now, unfortunately, with lots of things of human behavior over the last 100 years, there's consequences. Some of the unintended consequences of abundance in our food supply chain, particularly calorie-rich food, has been issues with metabolic health. And there's no doubt we have to shift. But it's this idea that when agriculture was asked to do something, it did it. It delivered. And I think we're at another point in time now when agriculture is going to have to do the same thing. I think when I talk about our biome, what am I talking about? I'm talking about our planet, essentially. And what I got really interested in, the more I learned about animal health, the more I went backwards and forwards to where the animals were being consumed, to how we grew the crops. It brought me back to soil. And I'll talk a bit about soil today, and I don't claim to be any sort of an expert in soil, but it's absolutely fascinating when you look at it as the foundation, potentially, for all our agricultural systems. And particularly, we want to look at biodiversity and the future of food. If we think about a ruminant livestock, we're not feeding cows. We're feeding trillions of microbes, viruses, bacteria inside in their rumens. You know, incredibly complicated, amazing ecosystems. And I think those ruminant livestock are essential to the climate change story, but they're also an essential part of human health. And again, I'm always a little bit conscious about simplistic ideas to solve problems. And I think we must understand that actually our ruminant livestock are a key part of the future of agriculture. So it's back to Jack Bobo again. Bad to worse or good to great. And I think we have achieved so much. You know, I think we really have, it's not just in farming and agriculture and humanity, but we do need to make a massive pivot. And that's difficult. My own opinion is a shift back towards biology or biorational solutions. These subjects are incredibly complex. And what you get in media is sort of narrow sound bites where we kind of break out the argument with two polarized sides. We're not having good conversations because they're incredibly complex. But I believe in human ingenuity, and I do believe in hope. Maybe it's because I'm a parent, that there's an opportunity for us to get better. And you can look at this picture and you can look left or look right. And I choose to look right. Again, making the link between soil, animal health, maybe crop health and human health. And I think we need to continuously shift the focus from disease to health. We've had 18, 19 months of a global pandemic. We all sure as hell know about disease now. But we often think about symptoms, and we must continuously tackle causation, because that's the root and the solution to a lot of problems. We'll always have symptoms. It's this idea of moving from prevention to cure. So if we look at healthy soils, healthy animals, crops, and healthy humans, can there be a link made? Soil is fascinating, and I don't claim to be an expert in soil, but we talk about carbon sequestration, we talk about nutrients and water management, we talk about our ecosystems. To me, the very key building block to that is soil. The soil microbiome, what is that? It's new science. For some people, it's very old science. To me, it's new science. And why did I get interested in soil as a vet? Because of the issues I was seeing on farm. Mineral issues, silage, minerals going down, and problems I was seeing on farm that made me ask the question, why? Do I give a bottle of this, or do I actually ask and find out why this is happening? And everything brought me back to soil. Soil is just fascinating. I obviously write some blogs and stuff like that, and one of the most popular blogs I ever wrote was this, Cows Eating Stones. Now, it possibly was because of the clickbait headline that I used that people clicked into it, were fascinating, but it's something that I saw for the first time 12 years ago, and I didn't know what I was dealing with. It's a condition that's often termed as pica. But since then, I've seen an increase in cows eating stones, which can be attributed to phosphorus deficiency. I've seen other things in calves, like B1 deficiency. Again, all increasing. And I asked the question, why? And the why has led me back to the soil. And the work with people like ecologist Christine Jones, who talks about the phosphorus paradox. And it started to make sense. It started to make sense that, you know, we're looking at phosphorus as a solution to cows eating stone, a finite resource. We can't continue to do it. But maybe healthy soil, if soil health is good, we can actually achieve this. That is not an issue. So it's brought me from above the ground to under the ground. And if I think about the soil microbiome, and I'm going to talk about microbiomes a lot, these bacteria, these complex fungal networks have an intricate role to play in soil, an amazing network. And they're involved in the nutrition of the plant. They're involved in immunity and this idea of competitive inhibition. None of us would be here, plants, animals, or humans, without some innate defense systems. It's about understanding what that is and what they are. Again, I saw this TED talk a good few years ago now. It's the work of Alan Savory. Again, it can be termed as regenerative agriculture. And I don't want to position any agricultural system against another, but it's fascinating to think about some of these ideas. For me, it was just broadening my mind to listen to the opinions of others. And what I found very poignant about Alan Savory, because it resonated with me as someone who's had plenty of failures in my life, was when he was involved in an elephant cull. And then he realized that was the wrong thing to do. And he changed his life mission based on that he was going to correct that wrong. So sometimes we do things and they have unintended consequences, but we can always correct them. So I'm going to come back to this again because I think there's a real link. And I'm going to try and make the link today all the way from soil to human health. Again, soil health, stuff I didn't know about. The plant exudes 30% of its energy through the root. If we went back 30 years ago, we would have said that was wasted energy. It's doing it incredibly purposefully because of these exudates are feeding this complex microbial network around the root that just like in our own guts and in animals' guts are actually involved in mineral regulation and uptake. We're talking about finite resources, potassium and phosphorus. We must recognize that, if we are dealing with finite resources, we need to come up with new solutions. Again, nitrogen. We talk about nitrous oxide. We have to look at reductions, and we're doing great reductions, but we've got to look at the role nitrogen plays in the whole story. And I think, I maybe should have worn my hemp jacket, but I think we're going back to biological and biorational solutions. I'm very interested in mixed species swards. I really think they've fascinated me for a long time, and they make sense when you understand the microbiome, and particularly the biology of soil, with different root lengths. They're actually, I've seen it, they're better for rumen health. If I look at the mineral analysis that's coming back from mixed species swards, well, it's higher. And why is that happening? Because we're looking after their plants' varieties, and that variety and diversity improves soil health. Now, it's a different story when you have to plant them and you have to keep them going on a farm. And certainly we have to do more work there. But I would make I would put my hand on heart and say in 10 years' time, mixed species swards, you can come back and tell me if I was wrong, are going to be the mainstay of how we use in grazing systems. I think, for me, again, parasite reduction is another thing we're seeing with them. Again, nature. We have adopted chemistry through the Green Revolution. We've seen how that has improved agriculture. When agriculture was asked to do something, it did it and we delivered. But we have to look back. We still need chemistry. But it's also a time to respect biology. And this is a big idea, a brave idea coming down to Kildalton saying this, but we talk about grass-based systems and pastoral-based systems. But maybe we need to change the narrative back to a soil-based system. Because if you don't get soil right, everything else can fail. And if we think about carbon sequestration, we think about water, we think about nutrients, everything comes back to soil. Another big one is biodiversity. Another complex subject and how we integrate it into farming. And we hear about lots of schemes. We've got to do better, but actually paying people. There's a lot of tokenism around subjects like biodiversity. And I think we need to do better because there's a real willingness on farm to do this. And, look, as a father, I'm sitting down watching David Attenborough's show with my son. He's just obsessed with nature, obsessed with animals. And for me, a moment is when you see the sea lions falling from the cliffs in his documentary, and you can say, look, it's TV and all that, but it's undeniable what we're doing to our planet. And when you sit with your child and you watch a program like that, it was a sort of moment for me where I questioned, we have to do better. And I think agriculture has an opportunity to actually engage with biodiversity. I was involved with 2 farms, and one of the ideas we had that didn't come to fruition through me being too busy was Project Nurture, which was this idea of bringing the science students from the local schools into the farms to help us with this, to help us measure and manage. Think about the ideas, the potential you could have with your students over the next 2 years of their course if they were to link in with farms and actually help with this, because this is not an easy task. Anyone who's been on a farm, and sometimes I think people who make policy forget how actually hard it is to produce food. So everybody needs to row in together here. And there's a huge opportunity for students to work with farms to help us measure, manage, maybe encourage biodiversity on our farms. I think I was getting, I'm idealistic at the best of times, but I was getting incredibly idealistic pre-COVID. And you know what's a great leveler? In the first week of lockdown, when you have to go to get food for your family, and you stand in a guarded check, and you stop at a guarded checkpoint, and you stand in a long queue in the supermarket. I'm a long-term thinker. The long-term thinking stops, and you're just glad to have food supply chains. I think for me, COVID taught us about how good our food supply chains are. I think if you look over in Brexit, and certainly when we look at policy change, we need to be incredibly careful when we look to the future that we don't incredibly disrupt the present. You know, we have a food supply chain that works, there's challenges within it, but just having food on the table is incredibly important. And it was sort of a moment where I stood back and said, easy with the idealism now, you know, recognize what we have as well. Does that make sense? Okay, so heading back towards the knitting a little bit. Animal health. I think about the cow, the herd, the farm. Obviously, because of the work I do, industry, you know, you have to think about consumers and the future of food. When I think about animal health, it's about performance and profit. Something that's often missed in this whole story about farming is economic and social sustainability. I'm sure every one of you in your jobs, just like me, wants to be economically sustainable. You know, we can't keep pushing farming and asking farmers to do without having the conversation about being economically sustainable. It's an incredibly important part of any plans in the future. So when I look at animal health, I'm very conscious that the work we're doing is about economic and social sustainability on farm. I'm looking at antibiotic reduction. We're going to have to reduce wormers. I'm going to talk a little bit about welfare. But for me, the key thing, and again, it's a eureka moment, I think. It's really, and it sounds very obvious, maybe you all know it, making the link with human health. Are we producing commodities, or are we actually producing human health foods? And I think that's a really important conversation we have, particularly when we look at Irish agriculture and we look over the plans over the next 10 years, and our potential maybe to be a protein basket for Europe. We don't seem to be having those big conversations. Antibiotic reduction. Okay, so this is a big challenge on farm. It's a big challenge because it's a human challenge. It's a one health issue. Animals, humans, we're all sharing the same environment. There's a huge opportunity to improvement. Ireland actually rates quite well on antibiotic usage. And again, we talk about nutrition and nutrients. Nutrition is a key component of actually antibiotic reduction. I'll talk about animal-centered agriculture. Vaccinations and other innovations play a key role. I think it's one of those big challenges, and it's a challenge because bacteria are smart. They were here before any of us, and they have developed one ability, and that's to survive. And they do that by adapting. And what happens with antibiotic resistance is if you continue to use the same antibiotics, you get the development of resistant pathogens, and those resistant pathogens can even share that knowledge with other bacteria. They're quite good like that. And again, I suppose the challenge is we have no new antibiotics coming. Lord Jim O'Neill in his studies projected antibiotic-resistant infections. Just what you want is a drill. Resistant infections to kill 10 million people a year. So this is a big challenge. Again, we've new EU legislation coming that's going to impact on our antibiotic use. So I've thought a lot about this. And like most of the problems that we face, there's a huge amount of psychology involved in it. And that's why I'm interested in psychology. Because how do we change behavior? It's the most difficult thing to do. And we start by doing it by looking at mindset. So the first thing is to understand where people are. You know, antibiotics are fantastic tools. We've relied on them, and then now we're talking about taking them away. So it's about a mindset shift. Legislation, like we'll see with antibiotics and environment, that will drive a lot of change. Data is really important when it comes to antibiotic use. We've got to know where we're using it and why we're using it. And then we're going to always need antibiotics. It's actually about using them correctly. But the real thing and the real opportunity here that links in with profitability is get herd performance management right. Nutrition, animal-centered agriculture, vaccination, the right genetics within the system. We've seen the improvements in Irish genetics, particularly in the dairy herd, and we're seeing some great work in the sheep as well. You know, so these, to me, are how we tackle AMR. Now, animal welfare is an interesting subject because I suppose I did a Nuffield scholarship in 2018, and I went off and I got to travel to 14 countries around the world. And what I was taken with was, you know, we think about the perceptions of agriculture here. When you go further afield, you know, the perceptions versus realities, people's understanding of animal welfare consumers are driven by key issues like cow-calf separation, indoors versus outdoors. And I think it's an incredibly polarizing issue. But again, if we just focus on one issue like animal welfare, we miss out. And that's the complexity of our food systems and the complexity of the conversations that are required for the future. I'm going to talk about the idea of a life worth living. But the reality for me in animal welfare is lameness, mastitis, morbidity and disease. Not building systems for baby sheep, cattle, or intensive livestock that suit their biology and behavior. I'm not as worried about cow-calf separation. And it just shows the difference between consumer perceptions and realities. And that's reflected right through all the issues that I talk about today. So I think this is an interesting concept, and it's sort of where animal welfare is going. And it's this idea of a life worth living. So you would have all heard of the 5 freedoms. And the idea of a life worth living is this idea that animals can have both positive and negative experiences. So not only do we want to take away negative experiences, we want to allow animals within food-producing animals to have positive experiences as well. And for me, this was kind of the core of my Nuffield, an animal-centered agriculture, that if you could actually understand the biological and behavioral needs of the animals, you would build better systems for them. And it was a win-win for the cow, the farmer, the consumer, the future. I still think that holds true. I think an important question we have to ask about animals, are animals working for us, or are we working with them? Because it changes the narrative of how we look at them. And asking the question, what do animals want? Not in the sense that we're wrapping them up in cotton wool. They're production animals that end up being slaughtered for human food. Yes, absolutely. But if we can give them more of what they want when they're alive, a life worth living, there's a good chance they'll be healthier and more productive. I see it all the time. I see it, a herd of cows with 100 cows, and for some reason, 10 cows come out of the system. It could be TB, and you see production being maintained or going up. Why is that? Because the 90 cows that are left probably have what they need more than the 100 cows. Sometimes much more isn't better. This is an incredibly difficult subject. If you talk about a polarizing subject, particularly, and I'll talk about social media in a while, this is one of the most polarizing subjects of all. But if we have a narrow focus on welfare alone, we lose in our food systems. Of course, synthetic biology is a simple solution to removing livestock systems, but it's overly simplistic. So this is the idea of my cow-centered approach to my Nuffield. Put the cow in the middle, give her what she wants. She'll be more productive. It's a better story for the farmer, and a healthier cow is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduction of antibiotics. So that was the idea. It's interesting when you look at this challenge, labor. You talk to any farmer, and all this other stuff that I'm talking about is nonsense. What's right in front of their nose? Labor, people to do the work. This is a huge challenge. We've seen Brexit exacerbate this challenge. We've seen, crops on the ground, pigs and farms, actually having people to do the work. I said at the very start, farmer sustainability. We need to be very careful at policy level, very careful at a top level that we, realize how hard this type of work is. Everybody is entitled to work-life balance. And I think it's, and respecting professions that are sort of the bedrocks to what our society, to build our society, and food and agriculture is one of them. I have no doubt that future automation and time-saving devices will help, and I think this is another potential area of research maybe for your students. And it's even keep it, the KISS principle, my metalwork teacher used to say a long time ago, really simple things like on farm, is if you're bedding calves, where you put the straw bales, how would you wash your buckets? Simple projects that will save labor on farm. Is that an idea potentially for your students to help with? Because it's a pressing issue on farm, is actually labor. Okay, inside the farm gate, animal health. So back to the knitting, where I should be, where I rarely stay. Again, my role would be improving health, improve performance, reducing antibiotic use, improve welfare, and improving farm profitability. The start of my career, I said at the beginning, was very much looking at sick animals. And then I realized that, individual animals, it was better if you moved towards a herd-based approach. Obviously, the use of vaccinations, wormers, minerals, and each farm delivering a targeted approach. When I started thinking about health then, you have to understand picking the right genetics for the system. And that goes across whatever systems you're looking at. You're picking a suitable animal with the potential to perform in that system. The environment then that they work in becomes incredibly important. We have an opportunity in grass-based systems, certainly for animals outdoor, but they still have to walk, they still have to go to the parlour. Cows and calves still lamb indoors at their highest, most challenging metabolic point in their cycle. And again, feeding becomes really important. I think for me, cow signals, I said at the beginning, was hugely beneficial. A really simple concept, but it stuck with me. I wasn't a natural stock person. I didn't really understand animals, which is a terrible thing to say as a vet, but I had to learn it, and I did. And when I learned it and I understood what animals wanted, and if you get these simple things right, the results can be phenomenal. Again, disease destroys all this, so we're trying to minimize disease. So sick animals, we're still going to get sick animals. It's our response to treatments. And I think what's a really interesting development is the technology around animal health monitoring tools. So I'm involved in 2 farms. We've got stomach, these little boluses inside the cows that are measuring temperature, rumination, activity, and I think, you know, a huge potential. Because the earlier we intervene on the individual animal, the better result we have. The less need we have for antibiotics, particularly oral fluids, an underused resource, I would say, on farm. And there's huge potential for technology here, particularly when you move from the individual animal to group management. And I've seen some fascinating stuff in the pipeline as well around this type of technology. But at the end of the day, why I'm interested in psychology is it's all driven by people. You know, how do we change behavior unless we understand people? Without people on farms, we won't have farms, we won't have food. It all comes back to people. Again, what have I learned about farms and people? I think setting goals has worked, and I suppose maybe, again, the evolution of my career, but working on goals. We're very, very lucky to have organizations like Chagas. We have so many KPIs, we have so many metrics and benchmarks. And, you know, looking and understanding where we are. And that benchmark metrics is going to get wider as we bring in the environmental stuff, and it can be a little bit daunting. But it's not about the whole picture, it's about focusing on risk. And we've done this on our Vision farms. But it's about understanding, okay, where the risks are. But I also think, and I'll talk about maybe in a slide or two's time, that if we continuously go for the risks, the failures, and the challenges, we'll forget the good stuff. I'm sure with your students it's no different. It's no different with my kids. If we continually tell them the things that are wrong, what do? What are the chances of improving things? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I think we have to give people hope, and we have to encourage people what they're doing well. And I think that the narrative at the moment, particularly in Irish agriculture, seems to be an onslaught on what we're doing and failing to recognize what we've done well. A few nodding heads. Yeah? So, okay. So, anyway, back to herd health. So, again, I went to France in 2009. I met this great guy, Olivier Crenn, bagpipe playing, French vet, drinking wine for lunch. It was good. But, you know, he was a remarkable character. Looking at animal nutrition, global farm visits, his passion and his enthusiasm was infectious. And I came home and I got up a good few mornings early. I was trying to think, how can I implement this in my practice? And I drew a circle on a page, and I realized how cyclical our herd-based systems are, and grass-based systems in sheep and cattle. And that if I got in key times in advance of calving or lambing, that I could have a massive impact, which essentially was, to me, was prevention. So again, one of the ideas that I brought back with me was this intervention, but I hit a stumbling block. So how do you simplify anything? And I do reference a good few books in this talk, but I think, you know, reading and learning and looking outside my industry has been incredibly useful for me. And I read a book by a Harvard professor, Atul Gawande, who is an amazing person. And he wrote a book called The Checklist Manifesto, and he talked about the use of checklists in hospitals and how they were impacting medical misadventures. And I started applying checklists on farm, and they're traffic light systems, nothing revolutionary there, Tommy. But what I discovered with the checklist systems in advance of maybe key areas, were the greens were more important than the reds. We have to tell people what they're doing well. And also, when I was doing reports, what I found, instead of giving a 57-page report that would sit on top of the fridge, I'd find some simple risks that would change in the short term that get people to do something. And small, simple actions over time really started to work. So another part for me was, and this is probably a key moment in my career as a vet, was a focus on biology and behavior. Actually looking at cows, calves, and sheep. What do they want? You know, we talk about all this technology and everything like that, but if cows don't have water, or sheep don't have water, we're ruminant animals with a big fermentation vat in there. What's the impact of that? We miss such simple things. Looking at the environment that the animals are in, and this is true for intensive livestock as well. So to me now, it's about what is optimal biology and behavior for better performance. Again, this is a diagram that I put into my Nuffield to fill a page, but it's about understanding the cow. She moves at 2.5, 3 kilometers an hour. She's a herd species. She likes to eat for 6 to 8 hours a day. She likes to lie down to ruminate. What happens if we don't give her her day? Will she perform? What happens if we give her what she wants? What happens to any animal? What happens to us if we get what we want, to a degree? Do we perform better? Yes, we do. So it's about simple understanding of the animals. For me, and I'm not pontificating, even though it might sound like I am, but to me, it was very simple, but very, very revolutionary in how I dealt with animals on farm. Again, intensive livestock. What's their role in the future of food? I think they have an important part to play. They have some more challenges around animal welfare and perceptions. Can they get better? Of course. But they'll play a key part in the future of food. And I think what was interesting when we talk about maybe the reduction of fertilizers and the price, somebody said it outside, is going to drive it, but we need to reduce fertilizers anyway. A pig farmer said to me recently, my slurry could be worth more than my pigs in 10 years' time. And it's true. What we don't understand about this great potential plant movement is plants don't grow without fertilizers. And inorganic fertilizers create a lot of challenges. So I think it's a very complex debate that, again, I go back to, you look on the media and it's just polarized debate, no depth to the conversation of the challenges. Okay, ruminant nutrition, so back to the topic again. Again, huge impact on farm performance. If we look at calves, again, I have 6 rules with calves: colostrum, feeding, hygiene, space, fresh air, and calf comfort. Get those 6 things right and you'll rear healthy calves. What does the calf want? Calf will feed anytime between 8 to 12 times a day. Will drink up to 10 litres of milk. What's the constituents of milk, normal milk, when we're looking at milk replacers? The further you go away from biology with any animal, the more stress you'll put on them. We have to look at the normal biological feeding of calves. I think there's some really interesting trends coming up on cows. We look at proteins. We look at protein feeds, sources of protein. We look at rumen health. I think we have some rumen health challenges. People mightn't like to hear it, but I think we definitely have some rumen health challenges. Summer scour syndrome in calves. I've been talking about it for 8 to 10 years now. And I met someone at the Moore Park Open Day who was on a stand and said, yeah, every second farmer was talking about it. It's an iceberg disease. It's an indication of something that we need to improve. And most of these diseases brought me all the way back to soil. Again, minerals. We are seeing a reduction in minerals within our farming systems with issues with animals. We can't keep putting in finite resources to solve problems. That's not a long-term solution. Again, reduction of general infection pressure. We talk about disease. By golly, are we sick of disease at this stage? As I look out onto the mass, we've had an incredibly challenging 18 months. And no matter what disease it is, it comes back to the principles of infection pressure versus immunity. We're balancing these two. So we're always trying to improve immunity, and we're going to try and reduce infection pressure. Washing our hands, we look at immunity, we look at what we've achieved through vaccination, particularly in this country, and the stimulation of immunity. But to me, what has been missing a lot in the story, even on COVID, and particularly on animal health, is nutrition is still a pivotal part of the immunity story. Getting nutrition right is incredibly important. Again, on farm, I have a process. Listening, wasn't always a good listener. Listening, looking, and assessing immunity and infection pressure, and then applying checklists. This is a training course I developed for vets, but it sort of outlays, I suppose, kind of my thinking around systems. So it's a milk quality program, and it actually starts with psychology. And it's interesting, I read another book, totally off the charts now, for nothing to do with agriculture, but I would highly recommend it of all the books I'm spoofing on about. Anyone read Atomic Habits from James Clear? No? No takers? One taker? Good? It's brilliant. It's the best book I've ever read. But he was talking about, I was developing this program on a little bit, and he was talking about, he had a story at the start of it, talking about the British cycling team. Now, you're wondering what the British cycling team have to do with agriculture and nutrients and nutrition. But there was a guy, the British cycling team were in a desperate place. They were the companies who made the bikes didn't even want to give them the bikes because they didn't want to be associated with them. And they brought in a guy called David Brailsford. And what he did was he said, we're going to go put a 5-year plan together. We're going to make small changes over time. And we're going to change the saddles, we're going to change the wheels, but he did other things. He got them to wash their hands differently. Do all these small changes. So it wasn't 5 years, within 3 years they went to the 2012 Olympics in London. And some of you will remember what they did there. And they won 6 of the 7 preceding Tour de France's. And what that was about was the 1% rule. And it just struck me, it's very, very similar in systems in agriculture. That mastitis, everybody wants a bolus, a shot, or a thing, but mastitis is a cumulative effect of small changes over time, consistent routines. So I started thinking about this and, again, developing the checklists, basing to find out, where are the risks, what are the things. But again, one of the first things I'll do on farm is, does somebody actually want to even change? There's some people are happy with where their milk quality is. No matter what I say, they're not going to change. But again, it was just looking at targeting different areas in the farm, making some small changes, looking at the cow, looking at the milking routine, looking at the environment, and identifying the risks, recognizing what's been done well, not giving 57 things to do, but making small changes over time, a bit like the British cycling team. And what I was seeing with this was, with these actions, was incredible results, real improvements in milk quality. And then it's about reviewing. Anybody who's been involved in farming will know that it's a continuously, so it's almost, sometimes it's like a slog at times. You fix one problem and another problem arises. I often think about Father Ted's car when he started banging the back of the car. But, it is a challenge, so it's constant reviewing. And to me, that's what herd health is. It's about a constant process of reviewing. Again, I've been very lucky to be involved in these 2 farms. Unfortunately, I haven't given them as much time of late as I should have, but the concept, again, was looking at a lot of the principles I talk about in this and how we could move forward. 2 really underperforming farms, to be fair. We focused on milk quality with the Other Things program, and we went from 2 chronic herds when we started before this time last year to probably looking at doing 20–25% of our cows on antibiotics this year. So we've made significant improvements in calf health and lameness. And I suppose one of the challenges I'd said with us is one of our pillars is biodiversity. And we had the idea for Project Nurture. It didn't come to fruition, but I think it's a huge opportunity for your students to get involved with helping farms maybe to help with this biodiversity measuring and managing. That sound like an idea? Okay, so 2020, the end of 2020, 2021, I came across microbes. And it was sort of a missing piece in the jigsaw for me. And if we think about microbes, I've talked about the soil microbiome, and apologies for the size of this now, but I've talked about the animal's nutrition, the ruminant being a large fermentation vat of microbes and viruses and protozoa. Microbes are everywhere around us. And I was introduced to this concept that, we typically think of bad bacteria. And I've been getting to work with good bacteria, beneficial bacteria, and it's literally blown my mind. I've got to work on farm. Here's one of our farm managers, Stephen, using environmental microbes, fogging in good lactobacillus live bacteria into the environment. Because everything's about competition, good and bad. So if we fog in good bacteria, we create an environment where the good bacteria propagate and take over. Lactobacillus are very important for the microbiome of the airways. And what we're seeing was we're using less straw, particularly we have very poor facilities, so we have a lot of straw sheds. We've seen reduction in mastitis, but still it's a work in progress. I know there's somebody far superior to me and there's a far more in-depth panel looking at a lot of these subjects later on, but we're looking at slurry inoculants. If we're going to reduce inorganic fertilizers, what can we do with the ones we have? And I think there's a huge opportunity here. We'll have some interesting work coming out of the farms next year, using massive volumes of live liquid bacteria to change the nutrient quality of the slurry, but also looking at the soil microbiome. What bacteria can we grow in slurry that are going to enhance the soil microbiome? Biorational biological solutions. And again, home-affirmative silage inoculants. Really, really fascinating. So we're continuing to work with these, but it's just changed the way I think about things, I suppose. And okay, so again, we're talking about nutrition and nutrients. And we go to Hippocrates, the godfather of modern medicine. And he said that all diseases begin in the gut. And for a lot of our animal issues, human issues, it's true. And again, I got to work with a project, and I'm continually working with, on the gut microbiome. I spent the last 14 months reading everything I could about the microbiome of soil and animals and humans. And it's fascinating. It's this idea that we have a community of microbes inside us, all of us. We have 1 trillion human cells and we have 10 trillion bacterial cells. What are they doing? Are they there for a purpose? They sure as hell are. They're there and they play a key role in digestive health, nutrition, immunity, and competitive inhibition. And it's really, really interesting to look at some of the research that's coming out of it, like particularly in Cork, who are leaders in this, and look at the link between the gut and the brain. And I think this is going to be the most interesting frontier. If you wanted to look at healthy microbiomes, apparently through a study done on the Irish rugby team, they've got one of the healthiest ones. But I think there's a real link all the way from soil, all the way to human health. And again, I talked about their role in soil. Nutrition, breakdown of, fibers and down to short-chain fatty acids. 70% of our immune system's in the gut, in the form of gut-associated lymphoid tissue. We have 1 trillion lymphocytes in our gut. It's not just a happy PR slogan, it's the truth. So really, really interesting. And again, none of us would be here without innate defenses. Bacteria are always competing with each other. I got involved to work with these products at the moment, and I think, again, what I'm seeing is really, really interesting. And I won't touch too long on it, but again, it's looking at the use of good bacteria. So we have prebiotics, which are the feed for bacteria. We're working with probiotics, which are the good bacteria themselves. And this idea of postbiotics, which I came across only 14 months ago. And essentially, postbiotics are the metabolites the bacteria produce. And this is really, really interesting, and it's a whole other topic for another day. But the role and the results that I'm seeing with some of the research we're doing is just, it's left me in awe of the natural world, to be honest with you. Now, people say to me, Tommy, where is your hemp jacket? You're talking about soil. You're talking about probiotics. But when that question's asked to me, this idea, alternative medicines, if we look at what nature has provided us, on the left-hand side, anyone recognize that? Penicillin rubicans, yeah. The fungus which Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin from, which was a metabolite of that fungus. Now it's getting hard. If I had a Mars bar for this question, who's the guy on the right? Satoshi Amuro, a Japanese scientist, who went to a golf course in Japan and discovered a bacteria, Streptomyces species, that produced a metabolite, which is the complicated chemical symbol up here, that William Campbell later refined. What would that be? Ivermectin. Penicillin and ivermectin. I think, for me, when we talk about biology and nature, we have now got the tools through metagenomics and metabolomics to actually understand and harness the power of nature more. Okay, I'm nearly there. You're still all awake. I can't say that at home. They're probably watching Jeremy Kyle or something else now at this stage. But, this is an incredibly important, for me, piece of the jigsaw. Making the link between farming and human health. As I said throughout, economic and social sustainability has sort of been forgotten about in the argument. We have created massive efficiency through the Green Revolution. There's no doubt about it. But we cannot expect change and all these changes to come on without them being economically sustainable. We've got to absolutely value what we do. And anyone who's worked on a farm will know how hard it is. We've got to value farmers. We've got to value the animals that produce our food. It was that question I asked. Are they working for us, or are we working with them? We do have to value our ecosystems. And all of us, and within a group of friends, I'm very lucrative of people in different areas, we're all started realizing that, yeah, we're not doing much about it, but we're starting to realize that our ecosystems could be failing, and we have to do more. We've got to value our supply chains. We've got to value the work that's done in agriculture and to produce our food. There's a very complicated debate around cheap food. Absolutely, food is too cheap. It's viewed as a commodity. But it becomes a very complicated argument when you look at the rise of price of feed, for the impact that will have on the most vulnerable in society. They're probably two separate issues. And I think it's really interesting to link soil health all the way to human health. You asked me to talk about nutrition and nutrients, and I think that's the key message I have, is that the food we produce on farm is actually so linked into human food, to human health. Now, people, again, will talk about our broken food system and food supply. And certainly, there is challenges in the food supply chain. 8 companies globally control a lot of our food supply. We've more and more processed food. We've got marketing machines that can have every story associated with food. We can have 57 different types of peanut butter. Processing and profit are linked together. I think when you look at health trends, processing is the real enemy. When you look at whole foods, there's a huge argument for whole foods. Again, maybe idealistic, locally sourced foods. But this is a global challenge. And I think, we talk about it. We feed 40 million people in Ireland. Absolutely, we need to look after our own environment. But if we're going to have a global problem, we need global solutions. And we must recognize our ability to produce whole foods and good foods, particularly when you look at animal protein and proteins. It's still an essential building block of nutrition. You look at sarcopenia and older people, we have an aging population. Protein's essential, good quality protein. We have the ability to do this. So these are incredibly complex conversations. If you look at trends around different foodstuffs and probably metabolic health, if you look at, we haven't seen massive increases maybe in some of the traditional foods we think that are being blamed for this. We've seen a massive increase in refined carbohydrates and sugars. And we talk about the environmental cost of food, and that's a very dangerous road to go down. A bottle of Coca-Cola is probably more environmentally friendly than a bottle of milk. That's a dangerous place to be. We've got to look at the nutrient density of food, and the only way we can do that is thorough life cycle analysis. And it becomes incredibly complex as an exporter, where we look at where our food goes to, because we're paying the cost here. Incredibly complex. Look at something like magnesium, and look at the studies of magnesium within crops over the last 50, 60 years. Essential mineral for human and animal health. Look at the declines in that. So there's a real opportunity to produce better quality food. But again, I'm just somebody standing on a stage talking about the narrative. But maybe, these are the conversations that more of us need to have. That the opportunity for your students to work in areas like this. You want to talk about epidemics. Look at the type 2 diabetes statistics and potentially the impact that's having on metabolic health. So these are incredibly complicated subjects. But again, we cannot compare Coca-Cola to milk. You can only do that truly by looking at nutrient density. And I think people are waking up to this story. But again, if we have oversimplistic short-term solutions to the environmental challenges, we're going to run into big problems. Again, metabolic health, the human story. This is back in 1950. And you can see here the 30 BMI. You can see where the bell curve is. If you fast forward to 2020, you can see where we're going. We have massive metabolic health challenges. I don't think meat and protein and dairy products are doing that. I think if you look at the statistics, processed food, sugars, and refined carbohydrates, well marketed, are a potential. And I think we have achieved a lot. And then there's the stark reminder that 700 million people go to bed hungry every night. 9 million people die of hunger every year. That's a person every 4 seconds. A lot of them are children. So we have a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. This is really interesting as well. And again, it's linking the story of the microbe of soil with human health. And I suppose we've seen massive advances through metagenomics. And we can look at the bacterial species in our gut and the types of them, and we can make comparisons. And you can see here traditional lifestyle populations versus our modern Western diet. So we've seen a massive shift in our gut microbiome. The bacteria that are in there, that play a key function to our health. Remember, Hippocrates said, all diseases begin in the gut. And why is this important? Because we've seen infectious disease drop over the last 50 to 60 years, but we've seen chronic disease go the opposite direction. A lot of research done in places like Ireland and UCC is pointing towards our guts, pointing towards our digestive tracts, pointing towards our microbiome. Can you see the link between soil, our environment, animals, and humans? We're all interlinked. And I think this is the opportunity for farming and food of the future. Lots of factors affected, but definitely diet is really important. So when we look at soil, we look at animals, we look at ourselves, it's often the comparison between a healthy microbiome and an unhealthy microbiome is the idea of a desert. And if we continue to push soil very hard, that's what you'll end up with. Equally, if we eat bad diets as humans, that's what we're going to end up with. So we're looking for this diversity. And again, it's just ideas and concepts today, but this idea of diversity is really interesting. New solutions, more problems. Now, it's beyond me to mention the company, but I didn't get that. We look at simple solutions to the environmental challenge. I read a really interesting paper because I am interested in the gut microbiome. Looking at emulsifiers, what do we do with processed foods? We wrap them in plastic, we add emulsifiers in them because we have a long shelf life. And we put a lovely story and spin behind them. But the emulsifiers like P80 and carboxymethyl cellulose impact our gut health. So if we look at some of these meat alternatives with 25 or 30 ingredients, they're not exactly a health solution, okay? Maybe an environmental solution. So we need a more holistic approach to understanding the challenges that are ahead. And more processing can often mean more profit. But environmental solutions have to be balanced solutions. To me, I'm coming towards the end of my slides now, and thank you all for at home and here sticking with me. The future of farming, to me, is the idea of human health. It's understanding our ecosystems, the food we produce, and it goes all the way back to soil. To me, it's undeniable, the link between soil and human health. You can't talk about food without talking about food waste. We produce enough now for the 9.5 billion people to consume now. You know, so many of our solutions are simple. This is not a simple one. This is probably a hard reality for all of us in the Western world, that we're just got used to consumption. You can't talk about food without talking about consumers. And, you know, science doesn't seem to work. What do people value? I just love it when Ronaldo put the Coke away and drank the water and knocked €3 billion off Coca-Cola. You know, you compare Coke and milk. Look at the marketing power of Coca-Cola. Is Coca-Cola good for our planet in the future? No. Does milk have challenges? Absolutely. Is it part of a sustainable story? Absolutely. How do we sell that? It can be difficult. I'll talk about it in the next slide. You know, there's a huge focus on production in agriculture. Huge focus, and rightly so. I've made an argument we have to change our production systems. But unless we look equally at consumption, and that probably affects all of us in all our lives, we're all in trouble. Polarization of the food debate. And thanks to social media, it's polarized everything. But I think when you look at the food debate, because it's incredibly complex, and you know, whether it's Saoirse Ronan walking along the coast of the Cliffs of Moher through a field of wheat or whatever it might be, a beautiful imagery like that, to the extreme of cowspiracy, somewhere in the middle is the reality. And sometimes the reality is the best story. Some of you might have seen Clarkson's Farming, did you? You know, it's quite impactful because it sold to sort of, I know it was entertainment, but it sold to sort of reality around farming that people who farmed could have, I suppose, identify with. You know, if you were never on a farm, you could identify with the challenges that were there, and there were many. So I think in the middle of this polarized debate is where the truth is, and the trust is, and where the policy needs to be, and where the change can happen. Incredibly complex. And I think you forget when you go on social media, and I'm unfortunately on it, but is that you forget that you never hear the silent majority. And it can feel like, certainly, that polarized debate, particularly on the right, you know, it can be, the impact of it on farming families and the sustainability piece is quite hard. Now, the challenges are incredibly complex. There's no doubt about it. Simplifying it is next to near impossible. But we have the ingenuity, the ability, and we've proven in the past at agriculture, when we were given a challenge, that we could step up, and I think I've no doubt that we can step up again. Back to Hippocrates, good old Hippocrates. Our food should be our medicine, and our medicine should be our food. Simple, but I think very true. Again, the idea of diversity. I think, yeah, diversity in conversation, diversity in our soils, swards, whatever animals, human health, diet, I think it's a key component of it. So the future, I hope I haven't depressed you. Maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I think there's great hope. There has to be. I think we're world leaders in Irish agriculture. Definitely we need to pivot. You know, we can cling on to some things, and, you know, but you know, we have the ability to potentially produce high quality foods that aren't on the processing, you know, that aren't over processed. And I think if we focus too much on our own country and miss that portion of it, and people say, oh, just somebody else from agriculture talking about economics. No, it's about understanding the way our whole global food systems work. And it's a global challenge, and we have the potential to produce food, and we can do better. Making that link between soil, animals, and human health is key. But we have to respect our ecosystems. If we don't, we all fail. And I suppose I'm going to throw this back to ye. It's probably nothing like what you expected today, but anyway. Education is an absolutely key component to this. So many of you are probably looking at the new curriculum as a massive task. You know, I've talked, you know, it's been thrown at you. Apparently, I don't know too much about it, but it's come out of left field. But is it not a massive opportunity? Is it not a massive opportunity to empower your students in the greatest challenge that faces us, which is, and I go back to Jack Bobo, who said this is the most important 30 years that agriculture will ever have, and probably the next decade is the most important, to empower your students to think big thinking and small projects and the impact, because if we all can do small things, I think that cumulative effect can be massive. And this is my very, very last slide, and I always end with this one, because I read somewhere that if you have to end with an impactful slide, the words of George Bernard Shaw. I think it's a huge time for leadership. And, you know, leadership gets incredibly difficult when you look at polarized debates and you look at social media and the way the world's going. But the biggest lessons that I've learned have been listening, to have conversations. It's not about vegans and farmers, and it's about all of us together. You know, I don't care what anyone's dietary choices are. But certainly, I'll fight all day long for animal agriculture as having a role to play in the future of our country and planet. But it's about listening. Too many conversations are polarized. It's great to get in somebody in short media snippets. We've no depth to what are very complex issues. Obviously, I'm passionate. You know, focus is important. You know, we sometimes miss the focus. If you monomaniacally focus on animal welfare as the only issue, you miss so much of the bigger picture. We can't control a lot of things in life, but we control our attitude. I learned that lesson the hard way. Try and keep it simple. It's okay to have a bit of fun. Can't see behind your mask whether you're having any fun today or not, but and my wife says about our kids, you know, and I talked about watching the sea lions falling from the cliffs, is compassion and empathy. You know, it's there in the world. Sometimes you forget about it, but it's certainly there. And if I could wish one thing for my children, is that they have lots of compassion and empathy. It's not something I've always had. Being honest, the truth will set you free. Risks, we can't be afraid to take some risks. You know, don't be afraid to take some risks. And the final message is, taking a long time to learn it, but the easiest person to be is oneself. So that's it. Probably not what you were expecting, but you asked me to talk about nutrients and nutrition, but the whole thing is linked. And the opportunity, I think, I didn't maybe give you ideas, but I think for you and your students, the potential of your projects, not a task, but the potential that they can make a difference in the most important decades ahead in agriculture. Thank you.
So thanks very much, Tommy. That was very, very informative and challenging. And I suppose with our new course, we definitely have the chance to go and influence what comes up next over the years. Yeah, definitely. Just a quick question here coming up online. How will students from city schools do experiments on nutrients? Any suggestions that you might have for them? And when they have little or no access to farms? I suppose they do have access to lawns and other facilities.
It's a good question, and that is the great divide between urban and rural potentially as well, and the importance of that education going into rural schools, or into city schools. I think soil is attainable in lots of places. So anything you can do practically is useful with soil. I'm not an expert in doing soil experiments I'm much more used to shovel type work, but again, there's the opportunity to do that. I think we've got to link the urban and rural divide as well. I think city schools, I'm not funding them, but have to get out onto farms and, you know, get out and see what agriculture is about. I think what's really interesting is this initiative that Airfield are doing, where they're connecting farmers with kids and actually showing them their daily lives. You know, again, it's, you know, the realities of farming. You know, so I think any opportunities like that. I think if you go back to basic biology experiments, and if you go back to food again and looking at processed foods and looking at emulsifiers, anything you can do to look at the nutrient values of food and talk about the nutrient values of food and where food comes from. I think they're simple ideas, but I think that's, to me, that's the best I can do on that one. It's a good question.
Great, thanks, Tommy. Just another question here coming up. You talked about the discovery of penicillin, ivermectin earlier on. What role has the MSS got for us? Is that going to be a game changer in animal health and nutrition?
Yeah, I think I'd be quite excited by it. Now there is persistency issues, so there's always practical issues. So when you have efficiency and you create a system that's working incredibly well, and then you say we've got to do something else that's going to be more difficult. There's a huge mindset change. I've seen it practically on farm work well. Because if you go back to soil and you think about the various plants and the depth of roots and the soil microbiome, that makes sense to me. I think above ground, if you think the variance of the diet, one of the challenges with monocultures is, particularly as we get better and more efficient with them, is we do see issues like summer scar syndrome and cows eating stones. So I think from a rumen health perspective, they're better. If you look at the parasite burdens, you're seeing a 50% reduction in parasite treatments. And why is that? Well, plantain has tannins in it, which is a natural anthelmintic. The parasite itself, if you think about the larvae that come out of the eggs and their journey that they have to physically make onto the plant to get into the animal, it's, with perennial ryegrasses, it is it's a motorway up to the top. With your chicories and plantains, it's a more difficult journey. So there's elements to that there. And I think production, the research I'm seeing in production is very, very favorable as well. And obviously, from a nitrogen point of view, the reductions there are favorable. Yes, there is issues with persistency, but I do think, looking at where, and I'm a long-term thinker, looking at where I think agriculture is going in relation to inputs, that they'll just be mainstream in 10 years' time. Now, I'm sure people here in the room will remind me of that if I'm wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. And just speaking, if anyone in the room have any questions for Tommy?
Yeah.
Just in relation to mixed species swarms.
Yeah.
Is there anything, you mentioned nitrogen there, is there anything that we could, say, talk about in the classroom? Minerals, anything that we could test?
Good question. Okay, I think what's be interesting to look at with mixed species swards, and we think about 6 species mixes, 8 species mixes, is having some system at looking at root depth of the different plants where you plant them on. Just a visual look at root depth, and root depth over time would be an interesting one, because the root are exuding 30% of their energy into the soil. They're doing that for a reason. So if you have a variance in root lengths, you're going to improve soil quality, and then maybe even looking at water infiltration in. And again, I'm not a scientist in this, but they're the sort of things that if you could look at in the classroom would be really, really interesting. I don't know, the capacity then you go and you look at, you chase the tannins piece on plantain, something like that. It could be a project. I mean, I'm sure your students don't, have to do a certain amount of experiments, but looking at the research, there's so many areas potentially that, we harness the biological solutions and even biorational solutions. When I mean biorational it's not about throwing chemistry away. It's about understanding how chemistry works, particularly with a view that the chemistry is not going to be destructive to the biome of soil or our environment. So, yeah, I think very much physically looking at the root structure going into a, if you could put it on glass, yeah, and water infiltration would be interesting as well.
Okay. Any further questions?
Just maybe a follow-on question from that. Reseeding is an integral part of most dairy farmers, 10% or something that is a big. What's your view on reseeding, linking it to the
It's a good question. Again, it's probably well out of my area of expertise. I think it continues to be a component, and you have this whole debate around no-till or till and all this sort of stuff. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's farm specific. I couldn't give you I think at the moment we're looking at 15% reseeds each year. Could we get that down? Persistency issues with mixed species swards mean that goes up. And what's the impact of that? I think they're probably the persistency issues and the amount of reseeding, the potential that needs to be done, how that's done is one of the great practical applications we need to get right. Okay, it's a good question and I don't have the answer for you really.
Anyone else?
Sorry. Thanks. I suppose as science teachers here today, it is great to get that presentation and just see the whole big picture, Tommy, and even to be able to bring that to the classroom, and be able to present that to our students. And I suppose just change the narrative a small bit. Like, I like the idea that the farmer being known as a person involved in human health rather than just a person who's outside working hard, trying to just produce a commodity. I like that idea of the human health, and I think that's something we should all try and bring into the classroom as well. I was talking to a farmer the other night, and he was telling me that he doesn't call slurry farm waste anymore. He calls it plant nutrients, And if we could get that into the classroom and let the next generation of people coming towards, next generation consumers, if you want to call them, wherever, or farmers, that they'll take that on board as well, So I just think that was a really, really good presentation, Tommy, and congratulations on it.
Thank you very much. Very interesting when you look at slurry and you look at, like, the finite resources versus resources that are available to us, and the potential of it and how we manage slurry. Because nothing grows, we need to harness that power. I know Mark Plunkett is on the next panel and far more expertise in the area than me, but yeah, the pig farmer said to me, in 10 years' time, my slurry could be worth more than my pigs. Really, really interesting. And we'll have some interesting work coming out of the farms I'm involved with slurry inoculants. Like, we poured 200 litres of live bacteria into our pits, not like a litre or 2 litres. So it'll be really interesting to see, can we improve the nutrient quality of slurry? Yeah, so it is the story. I think it is the human health story. I think hopefully with the graphs there, I'm not an expert, but the graphs there point that we've challenges on human health. And I think my real fear is the simplistic narratives around climate change, and we might see them in COP26 as well, that are, okay, long-term good, but short-term dangerous around farming. And I know you're involved in farming yourself, so it's a very... One of the things that I find when I talk to farmers is the negative impact of all this negative information on them. It's very demoralizing. And yeah, we've just, look, and it's not, and I think I made a strong opinion and not hiding away from the fact we've got to get better. But I think these simple media narratives with lack of depth of discussion are very, very dangerous, because if anyone's been on a farm, they realize how hard the work is actually to do. And we just take for granted. I just sat in that car that day, the first week of lockdown, and I couldn't give a damn about the future or anything. I just wanted to make sure I could get home and have food, because we had no food in the house, because we were so used to having food whenever we wanted it. It's a real leveler. Potential leveler that we'll see in Brexit being a really, and I don't want to knock Brexit around, but like potentially we'll see some real issues come February and March based around ideologies and policies that weren't thought out properly. Dangerous, dangerous thing to do with complex subjects. On that note, but the future is bright. The future is still bright. That's quite a depressing tone to end on. Everywhere I go, and particularly in agriculture, I think in general, there's huge hope. And there has to be for all our kids and everything we do. And you're educators. You're part of that. You can either sow the seeds of hope or despair. And I think it's hope, because if we don't, we're all in big, big trouble. And I just believe in human ingenuity. I think when we put our minds to things, we have the capacity to do anything, as individuals and as in the greater. That's a big one to end on now. I upped it from the depressing tone.
No, so that's great. So the glass is definitely half full.
Absolutely.
Of milk.
Of milk. Yeah.
Very good, very good.